Welcome to the Strength for the Day podcast, which is a daily Bible study with Dennis Fountain. We hope this time together will be challenging, sharpening, uplifting, encouraging, and strengthening to your Christian walk. Thank you for joining us, and we pray you are helped through today's study. Hey, welcome back to Strength for the Day. As we are just to the end, the next few episodes, we'll be wrapping up our series, Journey with Jesus. In our previous episode, we were with Jesus as he was on the cross. We heard the words, my God, why have you forsaken me? We looked at his word, it is finished, or tetelestai. And then, of course, we saw that last phrase when Jesus said, into your hands I commit my spirit. Today, we're going to come to Matthew's gospel, and we're going to look at Matthew's writing on that last few moments. And what Matthew does is he turns it and helps us see really the power of what Jesus did in the sense of our access to God. Matthew focuses on that, as well as the principle that anyone could believe in Jesus. We'll see both of those things as we approach the passage we're going to be in today, which is Matthew 27, verse 45, all the way down through verse number 56. Let's watch and see what takes place. Now, the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. We talked about that in yesterday or in our last episode. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, some of those who stood there, when they heard that, said, this man is calling for Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed and offered it to him to drink. The rest said, let him alone. Let's see if Elijah will come and save him. So you have some trying to meet in their humanity, trying to meet Jesus' need, others in their humanity mocking him. Verse 50, Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Luke records for us that Jesus said, into your hands I commit my spirit, and then he died. Now notice, if you will, Matthew 27, verse 51. And this is key in understanding access to God, especially for the Hebrew people. And we'll talk about that after we read it. Verse 51, then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split. The graves were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. There's just a lot taking place. These are two different events that are spoken of, but they all begin when Jesus' death takes place. So the first event that we read there is that the veil in the temple is torn in two, but it's torn from top to bottom, as if God is tearing it from the top. Now, what is that veil? Well, it would be a large curtain that would divide the Holy of Holies from everything else. This is something that only the high priest could enter into, and you can go look it up. This was something that had a timeline. It was only supposed to be done at a certain time each year to enter the Holy of Holies on behalf of the people, and there's a whole history there that we're not going to get into, but suffice to say that it represents going into God's presence or accessing God's presence. So when that veil was torn from top to bottom, it was as if God was saying, now, because of my Son, because of Jesus, anyone can have access to me. Paul worded it this way in 1 Timothy chapter number 2 and verse number 5. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5, it says this, for there is one God and one mediator. That means go-between. There is one mediator between God and men, the man, Christ Jesus, who gave himself a ransom for all. So the idea that we read in Matthew's gospel Paul writes about this thought that there is one mediator, one go-between before God and man. So man cannot have access to God or be in God's presence unless they go through Jesus. Well, how is that possible? That's possible because of the atonement or the redemption offered to us through the sacrificial death of Jesus. You see, the sacrifice of an Old Testament, and again, man, we're not going to dive into all of it, but the sacrifice of a lamb representing blood that is shed for the sins of the families that would bring that blood in, and it's a recompense, it's redemption for them, all of that was looking forward to the coming Messiah, understanding that one day there would be a sacrifice that would be above all other sacrifices, totally acceptable before God. This is what the author of Hebrews wrote about when he wrote about a more sure, a better covenant that we have, a new covenant because of Jesus Christ. And so when Jesus died on the cross, he was giving anyone and everyone access to God. And so when that veil was torn in two, it was God saying, hey, because of my son, anyone can have access to me. And Matthew goes on to highlight for us that very thought when we read the next few verses. And we're gonna come back. I'm just looking through this, and I don't want to bounce around too much. So I'll just say this: verse 52 and verse 53 about the graves being open, the body of saints who had died were raised, and after the resurrection they appeared to many. That is just a miraculous thing that took place after the resurrection of Jesus, and we won't talk much about that. Some people look at that and wonder, is there symbolism or anything? We're not going to dive a lot into that because really we don't have a lot of context for it. It's something that Matthew wrote in there, that others wrote about. Paul referenced it very briefly I believe in 1 Corinthians. And I may be off on where that's found. But basically, it's just a miracle that took place after the resurrection of Jesus, another validation that he was, in fact, the Son of God. But let's go back to our topic for today, that the veil was torn in two. We now have access to God. Anyone can have access to God because of Jesus. Look at verse number 54. So when the centurion, so that's that Roman guard who would have been over a few hundred people, and those with him, when they saw this, those who were guarding Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, truly, this was the Son of God. And many women who followed Jesus from Galilee ministered to him, were they looking on from afar, among whom among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. So now you have these onlookers, these disciples, followers of Jesus. Remember, it lists these ladies as followers of Jesus. They would be disciples, not apostles. That's the 12 that we often refer to as disciples. But a disciple is just a follower of Jesus. So these disciples, these ladies who are following Jesus, they're there witnessing all of this as Jesus passes away. But the one that I want us to focus in on is what Matthew focuses in on, is that centurion guard and the other guards that were there with him when all of this took place. So the darkness, seeing Jesus and hearing Jesus's words, and then the earthquake, all of that happens. And what do they say? Truly, this was the Son of God. We have seen the validation and the evidence in these signs to show us that he is the Son of God. Now, personally, I really do believe that this centurion became a follower of Jesus. I couldn't say that I could prove that necessarily, but I do believe that in this moment, there's a few there that would believe that he is the Christ. And I think even Acts chapter 1, 2, and 3 could allude to the fact that there were many people, not just Jews, that were believers on the day of Pentecost, that had already believed. I don't know for sure, but I think some of these guards would have been part of that because of their own words. Truly, this was the Son of God. Now, when you look at this story, the veil being rent, the Roman believing, and the disciples looking on, the lady disciples that are there watching, what is a couple of takeaways that we could get? Well, the first takeaway is simply this. You have access to God. If you have placed your faith and trust in Jesus, there is not a go-between. There is not anybody that you need to pray through to go to Jesus. You don't need to pray through Mary. You don't need to pray through any of the other saints. You don't need to go to some bishop or priest or pastor to confess things. If you've put your faith and trust in Jesus, you have access to God simply because of Jesus, who he is. There is one mediator. There is one person to go through to have access to God, and that is Jesus Christ the Son. So number one, if you know Jesus, you have access to God. Number two, I want to encourage you to realize that there is no one beyond the reach of Jesus. Sometimes we look at people and we think, I wonder if that person really could get saved. I wonder if that person could truly become a follower. My friend, anyone who believes in Jesus Christ could turn to him. Anyone who believes in him could be saved. They have the ability to do that. Why? Not because of who they are, but because of the salvation that Jesus freely offers to anyone who will believe. So don't allow the devil to cause you to look at maybe a coworker or a friend or a family member and think, oh, God could never reach them. No, God could reach anyone. And so the third thought I want to give then is to be a disciple that testifies of the things that have happened in your life. The reason we know about Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and Anne the mother of Zebedee's sons, the reason we know about them being there is because they would go back and they would tell people with their own mouths, with their own words, what they had seen. And so I want to encourage you, be one that speaks up to people about how Jesus has impacted your life. You have access to God. Anyone can be saved, and God just might want to use you to reach them. So today, make a decision. Who could I tell about Jesus? Who could I share about what Jesus has done in my life? And also, before we get going on the day, just take a minute and thank God for the access that you have to him because of his Son. Hope that'd be a help, and we will see you tomorrow in our next episode, and have a great day.